Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I will talk about energy security. However, I will focus on the geopolitical dimension of it, which I will put a little bit in a historical perspective, and then I'll talk a bit more about current threats to critical energy infrastructure that we are facing today. So, of course, there's a lot of talk about energy security. There has been a lot of talk, mostly revolving around energy trilemma in the Nordic region and in Europe. However, there are some different perspectives when it comes to assessing geopolitics and threats connected to geopolitics. So in the Nordic region, for a long time, the focus has been very much on the green transition and regional integration. In many countries of Western Europe, this was also the case, and on top of that, for example, in Germany especially, there was this economic logic driving a lot of investments in energy infrastructure. And that logic was also driving investments, for example, in Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, because there was a belief in Berlin that if we increase economic interdependence with Russia, we will make Russia more dependent on us, that it will have a spillover effect and also democratize Russia as a state actor and kind of bring it closer to Europe. This view on geopolitics was very different in the former Soviet sphere. So countries in Central Eastern Europe thought of energy, of security of supply, but also in its geopolitical dimension. That's because already in mid to late 1990s, it was discussed in Moscow that with a strategic loss of military power in its near abroad, Russia will start using energy exports as a foreign policy tool to exert pressure. That was, of course, possible because after the change of the political system, countries remained locked in this Soviet-era infrastructure of interconnecting oil and gas pipelines. So they remained connected to each other and to mainland Russia. So it was very easy to use that infrastructure as a tool of pressure. So over the years, since the 1990s, we've seen a lot of energy blackmail episodes. There was a high deniability to those episodes, of course, because Moscow could always say, oh, there was a technical glitch or some other coincidence, if something happened with the pipeline and energy supply. However, if we trace these episodes one by one, then we see that they always corresponded with political developments in energy importing states that were running against Russian interests. For example, when pro-Russian candidate was, pro-Western candidate was elected to office, or if country expressed pro-Western aspirations, such as joining the EU or NATO alliance. And taught with these examples, countries in the region basically treated security of supply and energy policy as a high security issue. That meant that it was not only driven by the economic logic, but also by security considerations. So, for example, Poland and Lithuania would invest in very pricey LNG terminals early on, even though it was cheaper for them to keep importing cheap Russian gas. However, these were projects of strategic importance. Secondly, there were tighter measures when it comes to protection of critical energy infrastructure. For example, in Poland, Poland is developing its first nuclear power plant. Internal Intelligence Agency has been overlooking that project from the very beginning, meaning that they are investigating if there are any links to foreign actors, especially with links to Russia. It was way before 2022. So there are also special, governmental bodies sometimes formed where energy security is seen as one of the top security issues. And of course, this different idea of what security of supply implies also had the regional dimension. We've seen it very clearly with the establishment of Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. There were different views on that. Germany was insisting this is just an economic project. Central Eastern Europe was saying this can be actually weaponized in the future. And additionally, there was concern in Central Eastern Europe because basically constructing pipelines that were going, circumventing the region were also making the region more vulnerable. It was especially in regards to solidarity with Ukraine. First, economically, because Ukraine was getting, transit fees, a lot of money in transit fees, but also politically, because there was a belief in Kiev for many years that being an important transit state for Russian gas to Europe gives Ukraine certain leverage when it comes to dealing with Russia. So there was a strong opposition against Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines because of that. Those views, of course, did not really change or align much up until 2022, outbreak of war in Ukraine and the subsequent energy crisis. When now this geopolitical dimension of security of supply became more appreciated, Russia also used energy as a weapon towards countries that never experienced episodes of energy blackmail before. For example, Finland never experienced any problems before. However, in spring 2022, Russia cut off both electricity and gas supply to Finland shortly after Helsinki said it wants to join NATO alliance. So again, we are seeing the same pattern here. And of course, since the outbreak of war in Ukraine is kind of an example. It's like exemplifies to the extreme what kind of threats are we facing today when it comes to protection of critical energy infrastructure. Starting from not even from 2022, but also from 2014, when Russia annexed some of Ukrainian territories, Donbas region in the east with coal mines, as well as Crimean Peninsula in the south, where renewable energy plants were located. That impacted energy security of Ukraine. Secondly, especially in the autumn last year, 2022, there was basically change of strategy from this energy blackmail and this habitual, deniability to basically strategy of directly, deliberately targeting critical energy infrastructure of Ukraine before the winter season. So a number of missile and drone attacks causing power outages and affecting civilian population. And then there is also a cyber security. There was a cyber attack on the Ukrainian power grid already in 2015 that caused power outages, and there were numerous attempts afterwards. So, of course, we do not expect to see anything to that extent happening elsewhere in Nordic region or continental Europe. However, things are happening, as we are seeing in the news. They are more undercover, and there are multiplicity of threats, especially that given current geopolitical situation, Repower EU plan, and so on, we need to accelerate energy transition. We need to diversify away from Russia. And there are a number of new projects on the agenda. So there is existing infrastructure, especially in maritime zones in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, if you think about the Nordic region, in terms of offshore wind farms, electricity cables, pipeline connections, and so on. And even though Russia is engaged now in Ukraine and it looks like it is a prolonged conflict, it might divert its attention elsewhere. There are also other state and non-state actors that could be threatening to our infrastructure. When it comes to, for example, Nord Stream pipelines and getting access to that critical infrastructure, even though the pipelines, even if they're not operational, they basically provided sort of a cover for Russian vessels to legitimately access waters along those pipelines and monitor them. So that's a problem. But that's not the only way how this infrastructure can be accessed. There was a recent documentary by Danish DR and other Nordic stations basically showing Russian research vessels that were entering international waters in the Baltic and North Seas and basically potentially mapping critical infrastructure, including offshore wind farms. And this is like a picture of one of those vessels. So they might be military vessels conducting research activities. And as we know, the spatial dimension matters. What we've learned from Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline explosions is that, crucially, they all happened in the exclusive economic zone, so not in territorial waters. It is important because then it becomes more of a matter of international diplomacy, as opposed if it happened within territorial waters of given states. And here, impossible not to mention also what happened last week with Baltic Connector. Of course, no publicly available evidence who's behind that. However, the entire context is worrying because, first of all, again, this is an example of what points to another incident of sabotage in a current political crisis. Secondly, this is, again, a strategic project in energy infrastructure. So the pipeline has been operational since 2020, and it basically ended Finnish isolation when it comes to gas supply. Before that, Finland was solely dependent on gas supplies from Russia, even though it was not much, around 5–6%. And after Baltic Connector started to be operational, basically it adjoined Finnish and Estonian gas markets and connected Finland further to the Baltic states and Central Eastern Europe. So this is a critical project in energy infrastructure that has been targeted now. And the third point is that, again, the damage has been done in exclusive economic zone, not in territorial waters. So there are a number of points here that make everyone anxious. So physical threats, they are already here. This is the new reality. There is also cybersecurity. Here is just like a map out of incidents in cyber attacks. In general, there have been many. As we can see, mostly they are between Russia and Ukraine, pointing to the fact that the two states are also engaged in cyber warfare with each other. However, energy sector is often increasingly targeted as well. Since 2022, there were, for example, 3 big attacks on wind turbine operators in Germany. So this is something also to consider. So what can we do facing this with these problems? First, of course, the most important is, when it comes to energy supply, is to have a backup, just as we are seeing with Baltic Connector now, even though it will take several months to repair the pipeline, because Finland accelerated the establishment of LNG terminal close to Helsinki and another FSRU unit, the floating one with Estonia. Finland will be fine when it comes to supplies, even when there is damage cost. Secondly, there is a need for regional cooperation, especially when it comes to monitoring critical infrastructure, especially undersea infrastructure, because this is harder to do and it's more costly. So there are more resources and more policy focus needed for that. There is a need for information sharing, because this is like very often on the line between, responsibility lies within industry, but also government. So information sharing when it comes to monitoring and protection of those different threats. Capacity building in terms of response teams, but also new technologies that are being discussed right now, because it is hard to monitor underwater critical infrastructure, such as, for example, seabed to space technologies that also use a number of different sort of informations and AI to basically analyze different sort of scenarios. However, just the last point, whatever we do, and with this increased monitoring, this is our new normal. This is not possible to prepare against any possibility or every possibility. It is important to have this technical preparedness, but it's also important that there is some sort of political and societal resilience, because this type of incidents, they always attract a lot of media attention. But if there is sufficient backup and we are prepared for that, there is no reason to panic. And I think I'll end here. Thank you.